The world of Norse mythology whisks us away to the boundless expanses of Scandinavia, a realm inhabited by mighty gods, courageous heroes, and enigmatic creatures. It is far more than a collection of ancient legends. It is an entire universe shrouded in mystery, imbued with the harshness of the Nordic landscape, and filled with epic battles. Norse mythology captivates with its depth, peculiarity, and abundance of stories that continue to resonate and entice to this day. This world, like a veil of mist, conceals countless riddles waiting to be unraveled. Our knowledge of Norse mythology has largely been passed down through oral tradition from generation to generation, and was only recorded centuries later in well-known sources such as the poetic Edda and the prose Edda. However, many details and aspects of these ancient beliefs remain unexplored and untold. For example, what existed before the world was created? What events preceded the emergence of the first gods and humans? What was life like before the great battle of the gods, known as Ragnarok, which foretells the end of the world and its subsequent rebirth? These gaps and ambiguities provide fertile ground for imagination, inspiring modern writers, directors, and artists to create new interpretations and works based on Norse myths. The ancient Scandinavians believed their world was far more complex and multifaceted than just the ground beneath their feet. They envisioned the universe as a system of interconnected worlds, linked together by Yggdrasil, the giant world tree whose roots and branches permeated all of existence. Each of these worlds, whether it be the majestic Asgard, home of the gods, the human-inhabited Midgard, or the harsh Jotunheim, the realm of giants, holds its own secrets and mysteries. Even the gods themselves, such as the all-powerful Odin and the cunning Loki, are presented as complex and contradictory characters, full of enigmas and internal conflicts. For instance, Odin, the supreme god, was willing to sacrifice everything, even his own eye, in order to gain knowledge and wisdom. Doesn't it spark interest and wonder why knowledge was so valuable to him that he was willing to make such a sacrifice? Norse mythology originated in an era when surviving the harsh conditions was not just a task, but a genuine struggle for existence. The severe climate, with its long, cold winters and hostile landscapes covered in ice and rock, greatly influenced the worldview of the ancient Scandinavians. Their myths are filled with descriptions of brutal trials and struggles, not only against enemies, but also against nature itself, which constantly challenged them. Imagine the piercing northern wind burning your face, the endless snowy expanses covering the land, and the never-ending polar night when it seems the world is frozen, waiting for the dawn. It was in these conditions that stories were born of heroes who fought giants and monsters, overcame impossible obstacles, and even defied their own destiny. This harshness and realism make Norse myths incredibly relatable and understandable, because they show life not in an idealized light, but as it truly was, full of deprivation, hardship, and, at the same time, filled with feats, heroism, and the pursuit of something greater. The scale of Norse myths captivates the imagination with its grandeur. There are no insignificant details or chance events. Every action has significance for the entire universe and impacts its destiny. The battle between gods and giants is not merely a clash of two warring factions, but a struggle for power and the right to determine the future of the world. Ragnarok is not simply the end of the world, but the final scene, after which the world will be reborn, cleansed of evil, and renewed. The epic nature of Norse myths is also evident in the figures of heroes who perform incredible feats that surpass human capabilities. There's Thor, the mighty god of thunder, battling giants with his magical hammer Mjolnir, which always returns to his hand after being thrown. Loki, the cunning god of trickery and change, capable of altering the course of events with a single ruse. And Heimdall, the vigilant guardian of the Bifrost Bridge, connecting the world of the gods and the world of humans, who will be the first to see the approach of enemies in the hour of the final battle. Each story unfolds against a backdrop of grandiose events that astound with their scale. A dragon guarding untold treasures, the giant wolf Fenrir, whose strength is so great that he threatens the gods themselves, or the world tree Yggdrasil, which connects all worlds and experiences the birth and demise of the universe. These stories encompass everything from heroism and self-sacrifice to tragedy and betrayal, from greatness and glory to catastrophe and destruction, making them both majestic and profoundly human, relatable and understandable to everyone. It should not be forgotten that Norse mythology reflects the Viking Age, their worldview, values, and perceptions of life and death. For the Vikings, the brave seafarers who sailed the seas and oceans, fought for honor and glory, and sought the path to Valhalla, the paradise for fallen warriors, mythology was not just a collection of tales and legends. It was their religion, philosophy, and way of accepting and explaining everything that happened around them, all the phenomena of nature and events of human life. These myths taught them to be strong, courageous, resilient, to accept the challenges of fate, and not to fear death, which was considered an inevitable part of life. After all, death is not the end, but merely a transition to another world, to another state of being. Valhalla, Odin's celestial hall, awaited those who died heroically in battle, and for the rest, there was Folkvanga, the meadow of the goddess Freya, where they could find peace and happiness. Even after death, life continued, full of adventure, battles, and new opportunities. And today, Norse mythology continues to inspire people all over the world. It gives us images of true heroes, teaches us to overcome difficulties and never give up, and reminds us that after every darkness, light will inevitably appear, and that even in the most difficult times, we must maintain faith in ourselves and our own strength. This rich cultural heritage, like Ariadne's thread, connects us to the distant past, vividly demonstrating that, despite all the changes and technological advancements, human aspirations, dreams, and hopes remain unchanged, eternal, and relevant throughout time. A significant portion of the knowledge about Norse mythology that modern researchers possess has come down to us through written sources, carefully preserved and passed down from generation to generation. The primary and most important of these sources, as previously mentioned, are the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda, two texts of fundamental importance for understanding ancient Scandinavian myths, legends, and cosmogony. The Poetic Edda, also known as the Elder Edda, is a unique collection of ancient songs and poems recorded in the 13th century, but originating from much older oral traditions that existed long before the advent of writing. These poems recount the cosmology of Norse mythology, the origin of the world and the gods, the fate of gods and heroes, and the coming Ragnarok, the apocalyptic battle that foretells the end of the existing world and the birth of a new, more perfect one. The Poetic Edda is filled with riddles, allegories, and metaphors that continue to spark controversy and discussion among researchers and historians attempting to unravel their true meaning and significance. The Prose Edda, created by Snorri Sturluson, an outstanding Icelandic historian, poet, and writer, is a kind of textbook on mythology intended for a wide audience. Snorri wrote it with the noble purpose of preserving ancient legends and myths for future generations, so that they would not be forgotten and lost over time, and also to help poets and storytellers of that time use mythological images and plots in their works, enriching them and making them more expressive. In this book, myths are presented in prose form, often accompanied by explanations, commentaries, and interpretations by the author himself, who strives to make them more understandable and accessible to readers. However, before the appearance of these valuable written texts, Myths were transmitted exclusively orally, from mouth to mouth. Oral tradition played a key role in Scandinavian culture and was an integral part of the lives of the ancient Scandinavians. The Vikings and their ancestors did not use writing to record their legends, historical events, and religious beliefs, relying solely on skalds, talented poets and storytellers who possessed phenomenal memory and the ability to memorize and transmit complex stories and epic poems from generation to generation. These masters of words not only entertained their listeners with their fascinating tales, but also performed an important educational and moral function, embedding in their works key values and moral principles such as honor, courage, loyalty, justice, and the pursuit of glory and immortality. Oral tradition gave myths a certain flexibility, allowing storytellers to add new details, adapt plots to the spirit of the times, or change them in accordance with the needs of the audience. It is thanks to oral tradition that many myths have been preserved and have reached us even after the Christianization of Scandinavia, when pagan beliefs and rites gradually began to be supplanted by the new religion that came from the south. Thus, the poetic Edda, the prose Edda, and oral tradition together create an amazing and multifaceted mosaic of knowledge about the ancient myths and legends of the Scandinavian people. These unique sources allow us to immerse ourselves in a mysterious and fascinating world where gods, giants, and mortals intertwine in an epic narrative full of wisdom, drama, and profound meaning. Now, let us turn to one of the most striking and significant symbols of Norse mythology, which plays a central role in the universe and connects all worlds: the majestic tree Yggdrasil. Imagine a tree so enormous and mighty that its roots delve deep into the abysses of the world of the dead, and its branches rise high into the heavens, touching the stars. Yggdrasil is not just a tree, but the axis of the universe, connecting all 9 worlds of Scandinavian cosmology and creating invisible threads that unite gods, humans, and monsters into a single system. The uppermost branches of this gigantic tree reach towards Asgard, the realm of the Aesir, mighty and majestic gods residing in opulent halls that gleam with gold and precious stones. There, amidst the clouds and celestial lights, stands Valhalla, a vast and magnificent hall where fallen warriors, having displayed courage and valor in battle, revel in eternal feasts, awaiting the final battle, Ragnarok, in which they are destined to fight alongside the gods against the forces of chaos and destruction. Asgard is the embodiment of strength, wisdom, grandeur, and order, a kingdom of justice and harmony. Slightly below Asgard lies Vanaheim, the home of the Vanir, gods associated with fertility, magic, natural cycles, and all aspects of life. It is a verdant and thriving place where nature and magic intertwine, creating an atmosphere of harmony and prosperity, and where harmony with the earth and respect for nature are the foundation of all existence. Further down is Midgard, the world of humankind, mortal beings inhabiting the earth. Imagine lands surrounded by a boundless and bottomless ocean, in which the giant serpent, Jormungandr, perpetually circles, its enormous body girdling the entire world, guarding the borders of Midgard from invasion by external forces. Midgard is the center of events, where the fates of gods and mortals intersect, where great battles occur and heroic deeds are performed. Here, life is full of struggle, hardship, and challenges, but it is in this struggle that the spirit is tempered, the strength of will is born, and the character of a person is formed. Far to the east stretches Jotunheim, the harsh and wild land of the giants, enemies of gods and humans. It is a grim and unwelcoming realm with towering mountains covered in eternal snow, icy plains, and untamed nature where perpetual cold and darkness reign. The giants are powerful beings symbolizing chaos, destruction, raw power, and opposition to order. But their presence in the world is necessary for maintaining balance and harmony. For without darkness, there can be no light, and without evil, there can be no good. Further along in Norse cosmology lies Alfheim, a magical place where magic is closely intertwined with light, creating a unique atmosphere of beauty and harmony. This world is inhabited by the light elves, graceful and beautiful beings associated with art, beauty, wisdom, and creativity. Their world is filled with mysterious energy, and their help and support often prove crucial in the struggle of gods and mortals against the forces of evil and chaos. The light elves possess unique abilities and knowledge that they use to protect good and justice. In contrast to Alfheim exist Svartalfheim and Nidavellir, subterranean worlds inhabited by the dark elves and dwarves, skilled masters and craftsmen, blacksmiths and jewelers. Here, in the depths of the earth, in deep caves and mines, these industrious beings create magical artifacts possessing incredible power and magical properties, such as, for example, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, a weapon capable of crushing mountains and summoning lightning, or Odin's spear, Gungnir, which never misses and always strikes its target. Their labor remains unseen by most, but it is precisely what gives the gods strength and power, allowing them to protect the world from evil. Even further down, in the very depths of creation, stretches Niflheim, a bleak world of ice, fog, and eternal cold, a realm of perpetual winter and death. It is the oldest of the worlds, representing the primordial chaos that existed before the creation of the world. Its chilling breath serves as a reminder of how fragile and precious life is, and that all living things meet their end sooner or later. Niflheim is the source of cold and darkness, the antithesis of life and warmth. In contrast to Niflheim is Muspelheim, the realm of fire, located in the south. Here, unquenchable flames, eternal heat, and scorching temperatures reign, and this fiery world is ruled by the giant Surtur, a mighty fire giant whose appearance at Ragnarok will mark the end of the old world and the beginning of a new one, when fire consumes all that exists, cleansing the world of evil and corruption. Muspelheim is the source of fire and destruction, a symbol of strength and power. And finally, Helheim, the world of the dead, where the souls of those who died of natural causes, from illness or old age, rather than heroically in battle, go. Here reigns the goddess Hel, the grim and majestic ruler of the underworld, half beautiful and half disfigured, symbolizing the duality of life and death. Her kingdom is quiet, dark, but not malevolent, rather sad and peaceful. It is a place where souls find peace and tranquility, becoming part of the great cycle of life and death, where nothing disappears without a trace, but everything returns to its original state to begin a new cycle. All these worlds are connected to each other by invisible paths through the roots and branches of Yggdrasil, forming a complex and interconnected system. They constantly influence each other, creating continuous movement, dynamics, and change in the universe. This eternal intertwining of order and chaos, light and darkness, life and death, makes Norse mythology truly vibrant, profound, and multifaceted, reflecting the complexity and contradiction of human existence. Yggdrasil remains its heart, a symbol of harmony, balance, strength, and the connection between all worlds, even in the face of the coming end of the world, Ragnarok, when everything will be destroyed and reborn. Now, let's return to the very beginning and discover how the world and everything around it originated. Imagine absolute darkness, in which there are no sounds, no smells, no slightest movement, absolute emptiness and silence. This is Ginnungagap, a bottomless and boundless void that existed before the beginning of time, where there was yet neither sky, nor earth, nor stars, nor any material objects. Only from afar comes the heat from Muspelheim and the cold wind from Niflheim, reminding us of the existence of opposing forces. Where fire touches ice, where opposites meet, the first drops of matter are born, from which life will later emerge. In this limitless and lifeless void, the giant Ymir first appears, a huge and powerful being embodying unbridled chaos, raw power, and primal energy. From his body is born an entire tribe of giants, covered in frost and ice, hostile to gods and humans. However, even such a mighty creation needs food to sustain its existence. It was then that Audumla, the cow, a huge and kind animal, emerges in Ginnungagap, from whose udder milk flows endlessly, which Ymir feeds on, satisfying his hunger. The cow itself survives by licking the salty ice covering the surface of Ginnungagap. And inside this ice, the figure of a god named Buri gradually appears, hidden until now. Buri turns out to be similar to a human, but endowed with special divine power, wisdom, and nobility. He does not possess the chaotic and unrestrained nature of Ymir. His essence is much closer to the future gods, wise, just, and purposeful. It is Buri who becomes the progenitor of a new lineage of gods who will establish order in the world. From him comes a son, Bor, and Bor has 3 brothers, Odin, Vili, and Ve, who later become the supreme gods of the Norse pantheon. They grow up amidst the endless void, observing the chaos and disorder reigning in the world, and feel a call to action. The world has been in a state of chaos and darkness for too long, and sooner or later they will have to engage in a struggle with the giants, who multiply from Ymir's body and threaten the existence of all living things. The brothers understand that as long as the element of the giants heads the world, there will be no real order or harmony. Soon, a fierce struggle for power over the world breaks out between the gods and the ice giants. The very first giant, Ymir, becomes the main target of the 3 brothers, who understand that his death is necessary to establish a new order. The death of this giant means not only the overthrow of a chaotic force, but also the transition to a universal world order, to the creation of a new world based on harmony and justice. By killing Ymir, the brothers commit an act of creation, transforming his body into the elements of a new world. From the giant's bloody streams are born oceans and rivers. From his dense flesh the earth is formed, and the skeleton turns into mountains girdling the new reality. Ymir's long hair covers the still young earth with forests and grasses, and the skull, soaring to the very top, becomes the majestic vault of the sky, protecting the world from chaos. And in order for something resembling the power of fire and warmth to light up above this vault, the gods take sparks from Muspelheim and scatter them across the sky, creating stars that illuminate the world and point the way for travelers. Thus, from the boundless and gloomy abyss of Ginnungagap, which existed before the beginning of time, an ordered and harmonious cosmos is born, consisting of 9 worlds inhabited by gods, humans, and various creatures. However, in the depths of this cosmos remains forever the memory that the world arose not from primordial harmony, but from the collision of 2 hostile elements, fire and ice, from the cruel sacrifice of the first giant, Ymir, whose body became the material for the creation of the world. And although now the gods, like skilled architects, have set about creating habitable land and arranged it so that both people, animals, and various wonderful creatures can walk on it, the primordial whisper of Ginnungagap, the echo of chaos and darkness, still lives under their heavenly vault, reminding them of the past. This is a reminder that even in the very heart of order and harmony pulsates that very chaos, without which there would be no beginning, no life, no forward movement. After the creation of the world, the gods not only brought chaos into order, but also became its guardians, protecting the world from destruction and returning to its original state. However, the universe created by the gods is not a calm and safe place at all. The 9 worlds, connected to each other by the roots and branches of the great tree Yggdrasil, are full of dangers, intrigues, secrets, and unexplored lands, inhabited by both good and evil creatures. Towering above all these worlds is Asgard, the majestic home of the gods, in the center of which lives their leader and chief strategist, the wise and all-knowing Odin, the supreme god of the Norse pantheon. Odin is a god who not only rules, but constantly learns, explores the world, and reflects on its structure, striving to comprehend all its mysteries. His strength lies not in brute force and physical power, like Thor's, nor in cunning and treachery, like Loki's, but in wisdom, knowledge, and insight. He knows that even the greatest army cannot defeat the enemy without knowing their weaknesses, their strengths, and their plans. It is precisely why the thirst for knowledge, the aspiration to understand the hidden mechanisms of the universe, and the desire to foresee the future became Odin's primary goal and the very meaning of his life. But everything in the world comes at a price, and legend has it that Odin once heard of Mimir's well, a source filled with the most ancient wisdom and knowledge concealed from mere mortals. This well was located at the roots of Yggdrasil, and its waters were imbued with the secrets of the past, present and future, granting whoever drank from it incredible insight and wisdom. The guardian of the well was the giant Mimir, renowned for his incredible wisdom and insight, his ability to see through time and space. When Odin came to Mimir and asked to drink from the well, he was met with a condition that would seem unbearable and unacceptable to anyone else, but not to Odin, who was willing to make any sacrifice for knowledge. Mimir demanded, in exchange for a sip from the well, his eye, one of the 2 eyes with which he saw the world. Odin, without hesitating for even a second, tore out his eye and cast it into the waters of the well, sacrificing himself for the sake of knowledge. From that moment on, he became one-eyed, but he gained what he sought: infinite knowledge, wisdom, and insight that allowed him to see the world in a different light and understand its true essence. After this, Mimir became an important figure in his quest for knowledge. Even after the giant's death, his head, preserved by Odin's magic, continued to give him wise advice and guidance. The god always carried it with him, so that he could hear wise counsel and make the right decision at any moment. But this sacrifice, given for knowledge, proved to be only the first step on the path to enlightenment. Along with wisdom and knowledge came prophecies of the future, of the coming events that would shake the world and change it beyond recognition, and he learned a terrible truth. One day, the world would perish in the flames of Ragnarok, and even the gods themselves would be unable to prevent it. Their fate was sealed. It was from this moment that he began to build his plans to save at least part of the world, trying to prevent the inevitable, or, at least, mitigate the consequences of the catastrophe. The thirst for knowledge and the desire to comprehend the mysteries of the universe drove Odin to the most dangerous and unexplored places where no mortal foot had ever trod. Once he went to Helheim, the gloomy world of the dead, to summon the soul of a dead sorceress and learn from her the answers to questions about the future, about what the end of time would be like and whether it could be avoided. The path to Helheim was difficult and dangerous, as this world was ruled by Hel, Loki's daughter, the goddess of death, and was surrounded by a high wall of snakes and rotting flesh, preventing the living from entering the realm of the dead. To get there, Odin took the form of an old man, throwing a cloak over himself and leaning on a staff, and traversed the dangerous lands, inhabited by spirits of the dead, shadows and spectres. Having met with the sorceress, he was able to hear the prophecy of Ragnarok, of the coming destruction of gods and men. The sorceress told him how the world would burn in fire, how the wolf Fenrir would break his chains and break free, how the serpent Jormungandr would rise from the depths of the ocean, poisoning the earth and sky with its venom, and how the Aesir themselves would fall in this last and decisive battle. Odin not only sought to comprehend mysteries and learn the future, but also brought knowledge to the world that had never existed before, giving people and gods new opportunities. These are the runes, ancient symbols possessing magical power, through which one can control reality, influence events, and alter fate. But the creation and discovery of the runes required incredible sacrifice from Odin, self-sacrifice, and a willingness to go through unimaginable suffering. To unlock the secret of the runes, to comprehend their power and meaning, Odin spent 9 days and nights hanging on the world tree Yggdrasil, piercing himself with his own spear, Gungnir. Without food or water, in agony and suffering, he gazed into the abyss of the universe, trying to comprehend its secrets and find answers to his questions. Legend has it that at this moment he seemed to die and be reborn, gaining an understanding of the runes, their power and meaning. Each rune carried within it a special power, each possessed its own character and purpose. These were not just symbols, but tools that allowed one to influence fate, change the course of events, and control the world. With runes, one could summon protection, predict the future, heal diseases, summon the forces of nature, or even alter the past. These symbols became an important part of magic for both gods and people, allowing them to gain control over their lives and the world around them. The stories about Odin clearly demonstrate that knowledge is the greatest power, capable of changing the world and giving power over fate. But its price is always high, and one must pay for possessing true knowledge. He gave up his eye, shed his own blood, subjected himself to unimaginable suffering, and even risked his life to learn more about the world, about its past, present and future, to comprehend the mysteries of the universe and gain wisdom. After so many sacrifices and trials undergone by Odin for the sake of wisdom and protecting the world, it is worth paying attention to other key characters of the Norse pantheon, those who complement this story not only with strength and courage, but also with cunning, treachery, and striking contradictions, creating a complex and multifaceted world full of intrigue and danger. Perhaps one of the most fascinating and interesting themes in Norse mythology is the unusual partnership and complex relationship between Thor and Loki, two gods whose characters and worldviews are radically different from each other. Thor is the embodiment of strength, determination, fearlessness, and justice, a defender of gods and people from the forces of evil and chaos. The son of Odin and the earth goddess Jord, he inherited the strength of his father, but there is no cunning, treachery, or subtlety in him, as is inherent in Odin. Thor is as straightforward as a lightning strike. He is always ready to engage in battle with enemies and never thinks about the consequences of his actions, relying on his strength and power. His main weapon is the legendary hammer Mjolnir, created by the dwarf blacksmiths, the brothers Brock and Sindri, who invested all their skill and craftsmanship into it. This hammer could destroy mountains, strike down giants, and return to Thor's hand, no matter how far he threw it, making him an invincible warrior. But in order to manage such enormous strength and control the power of Mjolnir, Thor wore iron gloves and the magical belt Megingjord, which doubled his strength and power, making him even more powerful. These attributes made him not just a strong, but a virtually invincible god, capable of withstanding any enemies. Thor's enemies were primarily giants, or Jotun, huge and powerful creatures that lived in Jotunheim, a hostile world located east of Midgard. What is interesting is that Thor's mother, the earth goddess Jord, came from the line of Jotun, which made him half-giant, linking him to these creatures. Many lands outside Asgard belonged to the giants, and they repeatedly tried to seize the world of the gods in order to establish their power and plunge the world into chaos and darkness. But every time the threat became too close, Thor would raise his hammer Mjolnir and set out on a campaign to Jotunheim to protect Asgard and the world of people from the invasion of giants. One of Thor's most famous and epic feats was his battle with the giant Hrungnir, one of the strongest and most dangerous Jotun. This giant was so daring and conceited that he showed up right in Asgard and began to boast that he would destroy the gods and take the goddess Freya, known for her beauty and wisdom. To protect the honor of Asgard and punish the brazen giant, Thor challenged Hrungnir to a duel, deciding to fight him in a fair fight. The battle took place on the border of the worlds, on neutral territory, where neither the gods nor the giants had an advantage. Hrungnir armed himself with a giant stone shield and a grindstone, hoping that they would withstand the powerful blows of Mjolnir. But as soon as Thor's hammer thundered forward, the shield and grindstone shattered into splinters, and the giant himself was crushed by the powerful blow of the hammer. However, a fragment of the grindstone did hit Thor's head, causing him a serious wound, which almost killed him. But even wounded and exhausted, he remained unbending and ready to fight to the end. Another well-known and instructive story is the journey of Thor and Loki to the realm of giants, Utgard, which was ruled by the cunning and sly giant Utgard Loki, known for his illusions and deceptions. It all started with Thor, the thunderer and defender of Asgard, going to distant lands beyond the familiar world of the gods to prove his strength and superiority over the giants. His goal was simple: to prove that no giant, no matter how cunning or strong he was, could compete with him in strength and valor. Thor, as always, took Loki with him, his companion in numerous adventures, as well as Thialfi, a young but extraordinarily fast boy who later became his faithful servant, helping him in various matters. When they finally reached Utgard, Thor immediately realized that he had entered a place where everything was not what it seemed, where reality was distorted, and where deception and illusions reigned. The majestic palace towering before them was so huge and high that Thor and his companions could simply walk straight through the gates without noticing them. Inside the palace, they were greeted by Utgard Loki, the ruler of this place, whose welcoming smile hid something sinister and treacherous. He recognized Thor at first glance, and like any giant, decided to test his strength and courage in order to ensure his superiority. Utgard Loki was cunning, treacherous, and loved to play with those who entered his domain. He offered Thor and his companions to show what they were capable of, offering them a series of challenges. But everything that happened next only caused Thor anger, irritation, and misunderstanding. When he was offered to drink from the drinking horn, he thought it was a simple test, because who could drink more than the god of thunder, known for his unquenchable thirst? Thor raised the huge horn filled with mead and took a huge gulp, then another, but the level of liquid in the horn barely decreased, as if he were drinking from a bottomless well. For him, accustomed to victories and accomplishments, this was unthinkable and incomprehensible. He could not understand how this was possible. Then Utgard Loki offered another test, to lift a cat. It would seem, what could be simpler and easier than lifting an ordinary cat? Thor approached the cat, took it by the paws, and tried to lift it, but the cat did not even think of moving from the spot, as if it were chained to the ground. Thor strained his mighty muscles, his face turning red with exertion. He gave it his all, 100% effort, but could only lift one paw of the cat off the ground. This was humiliating and offensive to him. Enraged and embarrassed, Thor demanded another trial, determined to prove his strength and superiority. This time, he was challenged to wrestle an old woman named Ellie, who appeared weak and helpless. Thor charged into battle, filled with determination and ready to demonstrate his power and dominance, but the old woman proved to be surprisingly strong, agile, and resilient. Thor struggled with all his might to move her, but she stood as if rooted to the ground, unwavering and invulnerable. At one point, he even found himself on one knee before her, which was extremely humiliating and shameful for him. No one could believe what was happening. Everyone was shocked by what they saw. This was not the Thor they all knew and feared, the god of thunder capable of destroying mountains and crushing giants. This was Thor who, for the first time in his life, faced something that could not be overcome with mere physical strength, something against which even his might was powerless. The next day, as they prepared to leave Utgard and return to Asgard, Loki revealed the truth to Thor and his companions, telling them that each of these trials was not what it seemed at first glance, that everything was deception and illusion. The horn was connected to the ocean, from which Thor tried to drink, and he drank a significant amount, reducing the level of the world's ocean. The cat that Thor tried to lift was connected to the world serpent, Jormungandr, which encircled the world, and the old woman he wrestled was old age itself, which no one can overcome, since old age comes to everyone, and even the gods are powerless against it. Thor stood, clenching his hammer, Mjolnir, ready to destroy everything around him, to incinerate Utgard Loki and his palace for deception and humiliation. But at that very moment, Utgard Loki and his palace disappeared as if they had never existed, leaving him on an empty plain, completely alone. This journey became a harsh lesson for Thor, a reminder that even strength has its limits, that not everything in the world can be solved with brute force, and that sometimes you need to rely on wit, cunning, and ingenuity. But he did not see it as a defeat. He did not give up or lose hope. For Thor, it was a challenge to which he would one day give a worthy response, proving his strength and superiority. But perhaps the most popular and well-known myth about Thor is the story of the theft of his hammer, Mjolnir, without which he lost his power and became vulnerable. One morning, Thor woke up and discovered that his hammer, Mjolnir, was not in its place. It was not just a weapon, but a symbol of his power and authority, without which Asgard became vulnerable to attacks from giants and other enemies. In a panic, Thor turned to Loki, known for his sharp mind, cunning, and ability to get out of the most difficult situations. Loki discovered that the hammer had been stolen by the giant Thrym, one of the most powerful Jotun, and hidden deep within his realm, hoping to use its power for his own purposes. Thrym set a bold and impossible condition. He would return the hammer only in exchange for the hand of the goddess Freya, known for her beauty and wisdom, whom he wanted to take as his wife. Of course, Freya categorically refused to marry the giant, but Loki devised a cunning and treacherous plan that could save the situation. Thor was dressed in a wedding dress and disguised as a bride to deceive the giant and get the hammer back. Loki, in turn, posed as her maidservant to accompany Thor on this dangerous journey. Although Thor was furious at this shame and humiliation, he agreed to the plan, realizing that there was no other way, that the fate of Asgard and the entire world was at stake. When the bride arrived at Thrym's hall, he threw a feast in honor of the wedding, expecting to see the beautiful Freya. Thor, pretending to be Freya, ate for 3, devouring huge chunks of meat and drinking entire barrels of beer, which greatly surprised the giant. Loki justified this by telling Thrym that she was so worried before the wedding that she hadn't eaten for days, trying to hide the true identity of the bride. When Thrym decided to give Mjolnir to the bride as a wedding gift, Thor, seeing his hammer, grabbed it, tore off his wedding veil, and furiously destroyed the giant and all his retinue, restoring justice and reclaiming his hammer. This incident showed how Loki's cunning and Thor's strength, working together, can solve any problem, and how important different qualities and abilities are for achieving a common goal. Now, let's get acquainted with Loki, perhaps the most ambiguous, contradictory, and mysterious character in all of Norse mythology, the god of deception, cunning, treachery, and change. He is the embodiment of contradictions, an enigma that cannot be fully solved. A Jotun by origin, but living among the gods of Asgard, he is a trickster who sometimes saves the world and sometimes brings it to the brink of destruction, exposing it to danger. He is two-faced and unpredictable, but endlessly charming, attractive, and interesting. For some, he is a destroyer, villain, and traitor. For others, a driver of change, a rebel, and a liberator. And yet, one thing is certain. Without Loki, Norse mythology would be far less exciting, interesting, and multifaceted. It would lose its sharpness and depth. But to understand why Loki is the way we know him, we need to look at his origins, character, actions, and most striking deeds. Loki was born among the Jotun, giants who personified chaos, primeval forces, and natural disasters. His father was the giant Farbauti, cruel and ruthless, and his mother was Laufey, mysterious and enigmatic. His very origin determined Loki's dual nature, his internal conflict between good and evil, order and chaos. He was connected to the world of chaos and destruction, but by no means followed the customs of his people, striving for something more. It was also unusual that Loki became an ally of the gods of Asgard, even though he was not one of them. He was not just their companion in adventures, but also the sworn brother of Odin himself, which made him equal to the gods and gave him a voice in Asgard. What prompted Odin to accept Loki into Asgard, to trust him, and to consider him his brother? Perhaps his cunning, resourcefulness, sharp mind, and ability to solve complex problems, qualities that other Aesir sometimes lacked, made him a valuable ally and helper. But it was these traits, along with his thirst for freedom, independence, and penchant for deception, that made Loki a figure who evoked both admiration and respect, as well as distrust and apprehension. Loki was not just a god. He was a catalyst for events, the one who set in motion a chain of changes, created discord, and forced others to act. Wherever he appeared, changes always began, unusual events occurred, and conflicts flared up. His abilities for transformation and deception were unparalleled. He could take on any form, bird, fish, animal, woman, or even horse, depending on the situation and his goals. Yes, once, in order to save Asgard from a dangerous giant, Loki turned into a mare and seduced the giant stallion, depriving him of the strength and ability to build a wall around Asgard. And he became the mother of the eight-legged horse Sleipnir, the fastest and most resilient horse in the world, which he later gave to Odin, making him his faithful companion and helper in his travels. This is precisely where Loki's contradictory nature lies. He could bring great benefits, do good deeds, and save the world. But this often happened after he himself created problems, provoked conflicts, and put everyone in a dangerous position. One of the most famous and instructive stories, which reveals Loki's duality, contradiction, and unpredictability, is the story of the abduction of Idun's apples, which gave the gods eternal youth and beauty. Idun is the beautiful goddess of youth and the keeper of the magical apples that gave the gods of Asgard eternal youth, strength, and beauty, allowing them to remain invulnerable to time. Every time the Aesir gathered for a feast in Valhalla, Idun took out her magical apples, and with each bite, the gods once again became strong, young, and full of energy, ready for new exploits and battles. But one day, Asgard lost this invaluable gift, and as always, Loki was to blame, whose cunning plans and pranks led to catastrophic consequences. Once, Loki went on a journey through the world with Odin and Honir, wandering gods eager for adventure and new knowledge. During their travels, they found themselves in hungry and barren lands where there was no food at all, and the gods suffered from hunger and exhaustion. Their eyes fell upon a mighty bull grazing in a meadow, and the gods decided to cook it to satiate their hunger. But no matter how hard they tried to light a fire and cook the meat, it would not cook, as if bewitched. The reason became clear when the giant Thjazi appeared above them in the sky in the form of an eagle, a huge bird soaring in the heavens. He stopped the fire with magic and demanded that they give him part of the meat as payment for allowing them to cook the food. Loki, as always, wanted to be cunning, deceive the giant, and escape with the meat, and issued a bold challenge to the giant, trying to outsmart him. But Thjazi was not someone you could play such games with. He was cunning, strong, and treacherous. He grabbed Loki in his claws like a small bird and lifted him high into the sky, threatening to drop him to the ground. In exchange for freedom and saving his life, the giant demanded that Loki help him kidnap Idun and her magic apples, without which the gods could not live forever. Returning to Asgard, Loki devised a cunning and treacherous plan to deceive Idun and lure her into a trap. He convinced Idun to leave Asgard, telling her that he had found apples in the forest that were even more amazing, beautiful, and delicious than her own, and suggested that she compare them to see for herself. As soon as Idun, trusting and curious, stepped outside Asgard, Thjazi, in the form of a huge eagle, grabbed her and carried her away to his realm in the distant mountains, where he hid her in his castle. Without the apples, the gods began to age rapidly. Their skin became wrinkled, their strength dwindled, and Asgard was on the verge of destruction and ruin, since without eternal youth, the gods lost their power and became vulnerable. When the Aesir realized what had happened, they were furious and demanded that Loki fix everything, because only he, thanks to his cunning and agility, could find a way to pull Idun from the clutches of the giant and return her to Asgard. Loki, as always, wriggled out of the difficult situation, promising the gods to save Idun and restore their youth. He borrowed the goddess Freya's magical falcon cloak, which allowed him to fly at the speed of wind and transform into various animals. Having transformed into a falcon, he infiltrated Thjazi's realm, risking his very existence. The giant, at that moment, suspected nothing, believing his scheme had succeeded and the gods couldn't thwart him. Loki located Idun within the giant's stronghold, turned her into a hazelnut, and snatched her in his talons to carry her away. He soared out of the giant's palace and flew toward Asgard as swiftly as possible, hoping to outrun the pursuit. Thjazi, noticing the escape and realizing he'd been deceived, transformed into a massive eagle and gave chase after Loki. The falcon sped towards Asgard as fast as he could, knowing the fate of the gods and the entire world hung in the balance. The gods, spotting Loki and the giant closing in, rapidly ignited a massive blaze near the walls of Asgard to aid Loki in evading his pursuer. As Thjazi flew too close to Asgard's walls, he plunged into the flames, scorched his wings, and crashed to the ground where the gods awaited him. There, the Aesir ended his tale, slaying the giant and avenging the abduction of Idun. Idun returned to Asgard, and the gods regained their youth and vigor by partaking of her magical apples. Loki, despite being the instigator of all the trouble and the primary troublemaker, once again managed to prove his value to the gods, confirming his reputation as a cunning and resourceful aide. His deceit, treachery, and agility had saved Asgard from ruin, but only after he himself had brought the gods to the brink of disaster, revealing his duality and unpredictability. However, the chaos and disorder that Loki brought into the world couldn't last forever, and his deceptions, even the most successful, eventually led the Aesir to lose trust in him and regard him with suspicion. Loki, accustomed to being the central figure, constantly seeking attention and playing a crucial role in the lives of the gods, crossed a line when he aided the giants in abducting Sif, Thor's beautiful wife, severing her golden hair, which was her pride and symbol of beauty. After that, Faith in him was utterly shattered, and the Aesir began to treat him as an enemy. But Loki continued to play his part, as if unaware that his days in Asgard were numbered. That harsh punishment awaited him for his misdeeds. Loki is a complex and contradictory figure, both hero and traitor, savior and destroyer, friend and foe, a symbol of change, chaos, and unpredictability. He reminds us that the world is never black and white, that every situation has multiple facets, that everything is relative, and that change is the only constant in life. Now let's discuss how two great powers of the world, the Aesir and the Vanir, initially clashed in a fierce battle for control of the universe, for dominion over the world, and then discovered a way to coexist peacefully, dividing spheres of influence and establishing a balance of power. They existed simultaneously, but were completely different in nature, worldview, and way of life. The Aesir, inhabitants of Asgard, represented strength, martial prowess, order, law, and justice. They towered over the other realms due to their ambition for power, control, and the establishment of rules. The Vanir, on the other hand, were closer to the earth, to nature, and to magic. Their home was Vanaheim, a realm situated to the west of Asgard, and they governed the forces of fertility, magic, prosperity, and natural cycles. It seemed that each of these races could rule its own domain without interfering in the affairs of the other. But ambition, thirst for power, and pride prevented them from living together peacefully, and sooner or later, conflict between them was inevitable. It all began with a goddess named Gullveig, who came to Asgard from Vanaheim on a mysterious mission. She was quite extraordinary, differing from all the other gods in her demeanor and appearance. Her body seemed to shimmer with gold, and her voice captivated all who heard it. Gullveig brought with her magical knowledge, secrets of sorcery, and spoke of the riches that the Aesir could acquire if they were willing to cooperate with the Vanir, sharing their knowledge and experience. But her greed for gold, selfish motives, and blatant desire to influence the Aesir, imposing her will upon them, provoked only irritation, animosity, and suspicion. The Aesir, especially the wise and discerning Odin, supreme ruler of Asgard, deemed Gullveig a threat to their authority and power, seeing in her a spy and an intriguer seeking to undermine their foundations. They attempted to rid themselves of her to safeguard themselves and their world. Gullveig was seized by Odin's warriors, bound to a stake and burned at the pyre. But from the ashes she arose again and again like a phoenix, resurrecting from the fire. She returned to life 3 times, demonstrating her invulnerability and arousing rage, fear, and bewilderment among the Aesir. For Vanaheim, this was an insult tantamount to a declaration of war, as the murder of an envoy was considered a violation of all laws and customs. When rumors of Gullveig's demise reached Vanaheim, the first skirmishes between the Aesir and the Vanir began, escalating into a fierce and bloody war that lasted for many years. The Vanir believed that the Aesir had displayed arrogance, haughtiness, and disrespect for their culture and traditions, and decided that they now needed to prove their strength, power, and superiority in order to avenge Gullveig's death and restore justice. The war between the Aesir and the Vanir was unlike human battles. It was filled with magic, sorcery, and divine power capable of altering reality. When the Aesir rushed into battle with swords, spears, and shields, relying on their strength and martial prowess, the Vanir employed magic, witchcraft, and the forces of nature, and the earth ruptured beneath the feet of their enemies, water turned to ice, and the air filled with lightning and storms. They could cause the Aesir's weapons to shatter in their hands and their orderly ranks to crumble, sowing chaos and panic among them. The Aesir, in turn, responded with their unwavering strength, military discipline, courage, and ability to fight to the very end, never retreating in the face of danger. One of the most famous and dramatic episodes of the war was the siege of Asgard by the Vanir army, which sought to seize the city and destroy the gods. The Vanir demolished the protective walls of Asgard, which the Aesir had constructed with great effort and love, investing all their strength and skill in them. However, Odin, Thor, and the rest of the Aesir rebuilt the destroyed walls time and again, driving the enemy away from the city and defending it from capture, demonstrating their resilience and unwavering will. It was a stalemate, in which no one could gain the upper hand, in which neither side could achieve final victory. The lands of Asgard and Vanaheim were devastated, villages burned, and fields turned into deserts. But the gods continued to fight, as if each battle could be the last, upon which the fate of the entire world depended. Years of war had exhausted both sides. The gods were tired of endless battles and losses, and a desire for peace and an end to the bloodshed was born in their hearts. The Aesir and the Vanir realized that their forces were roughly equal, that neither side could prevail over the other, and that continuing the battle would only lead to mutual destruction, to the demise of the gods and the ruin of the world. One day, Odin, the wise ruler of Asgard, and the Vanir gathered their armies at the borders of their realms, preparing for a decisive battle that would determine the victor in this long and bloody war. But instead of commencing the fight, they met for negotiations, deciding to attempt to find a compromise and make peace. At these negotiations, held in a tense and hostile atmosphere, the sides decided to seek compromise, make mutual concessions, and agree to end the war. Instead of weapons, words, reasons, and arguments came into play, and the gods tried to convince each other of the necessity of peace and cooperation. The Aesir and the Vanir agreed to a truce, which was intended to cement peace between their races, put an end to hostility, and usher in a new era of cooperation. To seal the alliance and confirm their peaceful intentions, the Aesir and the Vanir performed a ritual symbolizing their unification and reconciliation. They gathered their saliva into a cauldron, creating a common liquid that symbolized their unity and mutual understanding. From this liquid was created the sage Kvasir, an embodiment of knowledge, wisdom, harmony, and the union between the two peoples. Kvasir became a symbol of their new alliance, representing the wisdom and knowledge gained from the union of two different cultures. One of the key conditions for peace was the exchange of hostages, to strengthen trust between the races and guarantee compliance with the terms of the truce. Each side sent its best representatives, its most valued and respected gods, to the other camp, so that they could live there as honored guests and guarantors of peace. The Vanir sent to Asgard Njord, Freya, and Freyja, their most powerful and revered gods. Njord, the god of seas, winds, wealth, fertility, and prosperity, became one of the revered gods of Asgard, respected and loved for his wisdom and kindness. His children, the beautiful Freyja and the mighty Freyja, brought to Asgard the magic of fertility, prosperity, love, beauty, and sensuality, enriching the culture of the Aesir. Freyja also taught the Aesir the art of Seder, magic that allowed them to predict the future, control destiny, alter reality, and see hidden things. The Aesir, in turn, sent to Vanaheim Hoenir, a handsome and eloquent god, and Mimir, Odin's wise advisor, possessed of deep knowledge and experience. Hoenir was handsome, charming, and eloquent, which pleased the inhabitants of Vanaheim, who admired his appearance and ability to speak. However, his intellect proved to be mediocre, and he could not make decisions without the advice of the wise Mimir, who was always by his side and gave him wise counsel. Enraged by this, the Vanir, disappointed and deceived, beheaded Mimir and sent his head back to Asgard in protest against the deception. Odin, so as not to lose Mimir's knowledge and wisdom, revived his head with magic, casting a spell on it and endowing it with the ability to speak and give advice. Since then, Mimir's head has become Odin's advisor, helping him make important decisions and rule Asgard. The truce and alliance transformed both races of gods, enriching their culture and expanding their capabilities. By joining forces, the Aesir and the Vanir created a more harmonious and balanced universe in which both strength and order, as well as magic and nature, existed. The Vanir brought magical knowledge, a connection to nature, and a love of art and beauty to Asgard, while the Aesir helped the Vanir master the art of warfare, strengthen their world, and create a more organized society. But the peace between the Aesir and the Vanir was neither absolute nor eternal. The shadow of rivalry and distrust never completely disappeared, and sometimes it made itself known in minor conflicts, intrigues, and disputes that were reminiscent of the past. Nevertheless, the alliance between the two kindreds became one of the foundations of the universe, ensuring stability and a balance of power. After the fragile peace between the Aesir and the Vanir settled, it seemed that the balance in the universe had finally been restored and that the gods could live in peace and harmony. But even among the gods, where everyone possesses strength, magic, and immortality, fate always finds its way and nothing can stop it. And one of the most tragic and sorrowful episodes in the history of Asgard, foreshadowing the impending doom of the world, is the death of Balder, the bright, kind, and beloved god, son of Odin and Frigg. While the war between the Aesir and the Vanir offered opportunities for negotiation, compromise, and peaceful conflict resolution, Balder's death became a harbinger of destruction from which there was no salvation, the beginning of the end. It was not merely a blow to the family of the gods, but the start of a chain of tragic events that led directly to Ragnarok, to the demise of the gods and the entire world. Let's delve into how Loki's cunning schemes, his envy, malice, and desire for chaos led to this terrible tragedy, and why the death of Balder, the bright and beloved god, changed everything, turning the world upside down and foreshadowing the impending destruction of the gods and the entire world. Balder, the son of Odin and Frigg, was one of the most beloved, respected, and revered gods of Asgard, an embodiment of goodness, beauty, wisdom, and justice. He was called bright, radiant, and luminous, because he literally radiated light, filling everyone around him with warmth, joy, love, and harmony. He was a symbol of life, hope, purity, innocence, peace, and concord, an ideal that everyone, even the gods, aspired to emulate, seeing in him an example to follow. His radiance resembled the sun, illuminating the world and giving life, and his presence instilled a sense of tranquility, peace, and confidence in the future. But one day, like a bolt from the blue, everything changed, and a shadow of tragedy loomed over Asgard. Balder began to have terrible and horrifying dreams about his own death, dreams full of darkness, pain, and destruction. These dreams were not mere nightmares caused by fatigue or anxiety. They were visions sent to him by fate itself, foretelling his imminent demise and impending calamities. When he told his loving mother Frigg about them, she was gripped by horror, despair, and a premonition of disaster. She knew that if Balder died, the balance in the world would be destroyed, harmony would be disrupted, and darkness would triumph over light. Frigg, desperate to save her son from his inevitable death, decided to do the impossible, to defy fate and change what was destined. She traveled the world, visiting all 9 realms of Norse cosmology, demanding that all creatures, plants, animals, and objects swear that they would never harm Balder, that they would protect him from any danger. Stones, trees, beasts, diseases, and weapons, everything swore its harmlessness, vowing never to raise a hand against Balder or cause him harm. It seemed that Balder was now invulnerable, protected from any danger, and Frigg could sleep soundly, knowing that her son was safe. The gods, confident in Balder's invulnerability, even began to make a game of it, to test his protection and ensure its reliability. They threw stones, swords, axes and arrows at Balder, hurling everything they could get their hands on at him to make sure that he really couldn't be hurt. Everything bounced off him like raindrops, causing him no harm whatsoever. But there was one thing, one object, that Frigg forgot, overlooked. A small, inconspicuous, and harmless sprig of mistletoe growing on a tree which she considered too insignificant, weak, and unimportant to demand an oath from. Frigg didn't think that such an innocuous plant could pose any threat to her son, and she underestimated its power. Loki, known for his sharp wit, cunning, trickery, envy, and penchant for intrigue, could not stand aside, could not reconcile himself to the fact that Balder was so loved by everyone, and that his life was so well protected. He was angered by the love, respect, and admiration that surrounded Balder, and he saw in this a perfect opportunity to sow chaos, discord, and destruction, to avenge himself on the gods for his humiliation and prove his power. Having learned from Frigg, having gleaned from her the secret that the mistletoe had been left without an oath and posed no threat to Balder, Loki immediately conceived a cunning plan to use this for his own purposes, to kill the bright god. Taking the form of an old, harmless, and frail woman, he came to Frigg and engaged her in conversation, winning her trust with his flattery and deceit. Frigg, suspecting nothing, told him about the mistletoe, sharing her secret. This was enough for Loki to put his plan into action. He made an arrow from a sprig of mistletoe, knowing that it possessed sufficient power to kill the bright god, breaking through his protection. At another feast, where the Aesir were again throwing various objects at Balder to ensure his invulnerability, Loki approached the blind god Herder, Balder's brother, who was standing aside, not participating in the revelry, as he could not see and did not want to disturb others. Loki handed him the arrow made of mistletoe and said, "Why don't you join in this fun, Herder? Don't you want to throw something at your brother, to feel like you're part of this celebration? Let your hand be part of this fun. Let you too contribute to Balder's protection." Loki guided Herder's hand, pointing him at the target, and he released the arrow, unaware that it was deadly. The arrow, made of mistletoe, pierced Balder, hitting him right in the heart. When the arrow made of mistletoe struck Balder, all of Asgard froze as if time had stopped. The bright god, who had always shone, radiating warmth and joy, fell to the ground, lifeless. His light went out, and the world was plunged into darkness. The gods were shocked, stunned, and overwhelmed by what had happened. No one could believe that such a thing was possible, that Balder could be killed, that he was not so invulnerable after all. Anger, grief, sorrow, and despair filled the hearts of the Aesir, and Frigg wept, unable to come to terms with the loss of her beloved son, whose absence was an irreparable loss for her. Balder's death became a turning point in the history of Asgard, a watershed moment after which everything changed forever. It was the first real death among the gods, which showed that even they were not immortal, that even they had their weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and that fate could be cruel even to the strongest and most powerful beings. Balder's death was not just a tragedy, it was the beginning of the end, a harbinger of Ragnarok, the destruction of the gods and the entire world. Balder symbolized light, hope, order, harmony, and justice. His death meant that darkness had begun to prevail, that the forces of chaos and destruction had triumphed over the forces of good and light. It was the first step towards Ragnarok, the final battle where the world would plunge into chaos, fire, and destruction, where gods and monsters would clash in a deadly struggle and where everything would be destroyed. After Balder's death, the Aesir tried to save his soul, to bring him back from the realm of the dead and prevent the destruction of the world. They sent Hermod, one of the gods, to Hel, the realm of the dead, to persuade Hel, the ruler of this world, to return Balder to the world of the living. But Hela, Loki's daughter, the ruler of this world, agreed to return Balder only on one condition: if all beings in the world, both living and dead, would weep for him, shedding tears of sorrow. And everyone wept for Balder: beasts, people, trees, birds, and even stones shed tears, mourning his death and longing for his light. Everyone except for one being, a giantess named Thor, who refused to shed a tear for Balder. Legend has it that it was Loki himself, taking the form of a giantess, to prevent Balder's return and hasten Ragnarok. Thus, Balder remained in the realm of the dead, and the hope of saving the world collapsed. After Balder's death, the Aesir were consumed by anger, a thirst for revenge, and a desire to punish those responsible for his death. They turned their wrath on Loki, accusing him of betrayal, treachery, and orchestrating Balder's murder. This marked the beginning of his downfall, the beginning of his torments and sufferings, which culminated in his capture and cruel punishment for his misdeeds. However, along with this, the inexorable countdown to Ragnarok, to the end of the world, also began. Balder's death became a harsh reminder that even the brightest, kindest, and strongest forces cannot protect themselves from darkness, from evil and chaos, if they are allowed to penetrate their world, if they are not vigilant and cautious. This tragedy is remembered not only as a harbinger of the end, but also as a symbol of the fragility of the world of the gods, as a reminder that even in the most beautiful and perfect world, there is a place for tragedy and destruction. But until the end of time arrived, the Aesir continued to fight against the threats that could harm their order, protecting their world from the forces of evil and chaos. Some of these threats were associated with terrible monsters born of chaos, darkness, malice, and Loki himself, the god of deception, lies, and treachery. One such creature was Fenrir, a huge wolf, the son of Loki and the giantess Angrboda, whose monstrous size, wild strength, ferocity, and bloodthirstiness frightened even the immortal gods, inspiring fear and terror in them. And among all these battles, fights and confrontations, among the horror and despair, stand out the heroic deeds of the gods, who displayed bravery, courage, self-sacrifice, and devotion to duty, such as Tyr, the god of war, honor, and justice. Fenrir, the enormous wolf and son of Loki, grew not by the day, but by the hour, increasing in size at an incredible rate. When he was first brought to Asgard, he was just a pup, a small but already vicious and bloodthirsty wolf cub. But his power and malice even then aroused concern among the gods, a premonition of impending disaster. Raised in Asgard, surrounded by the gods, Fenrir became increasingly dangerous, aggressive, and uncontrollable, and the Aesir realized that one day he would be able to destroy everything they had built, destroy order, and plunge the world into chaos. Odin, the wise and all-knowing ruler of Asgard, received a prophecy, a vision of the future, in which Fenrir would play a pivotal role in Ragnarok, the final battle of gods and monsters, ultimately slaying Odin himself, which foretold the doom of the gods and the entire world. This compelled the Aesir to seek a way to restrain the wolf, to subdue his power and prevent the impending catastrophe before he became too strong and uncontrollable. However, none of the gods dared to approach the wolf to harm him, cause him pain, or kill him, except for one god, Tyr. Tyr was the god of war, valor, honor, justice, law, and order, known for his integrity, bravery, fearlessness, and willingness to aid those in need. He was one of the few gods who could get along with Fenrir, who could calmly approach him and stroke him, even as the wolf grew more ferocious, aggressive, and dangerous. When the Aesir decided to bind Fenrir in chains to limit his freedom and prevent his destructive actions, they crafted strong and sturdy chains and challenged the wolf to test his strength by breaking them, to prove his might. Fenrir, confident in himself, in his power and invulnerability, with pride and arrogance, allowed the chains to be placed upon him and easily shattered them as if they were mere threads, showcasing his incredible strength. Then the Aesir, realizing that ordinary chains could not hold the wolf, sought the aid of the dwarves, skilled artisans and blacksmiths who created the magical Gleipnir, fashioned from 6 magical and unusual components: the sound of a cat's footfall, the beard of a woman, the roots of a mountain, the sinews of a bear, the breath of a fish, and the spittle of a bird. These bonds appeared as a soft and slender silken ribbon, but they were unbreakable, possessing incredible strength and magical power. When the Aesir once again proposed that Fenrir test his powers by breaking the new bonds, the wolf suspected deception, sensing something amiss. He declared that he would agree to this trial only if one of the gods placed their hand in his mouth as a sign of trust, as a guarantee that he would not be tricked or betrayed. None of the gods dared to do so. None were willing to risk their hand, knowing that the wolf could bite it off. But Tyr, true to his duty and sense of justice, realizing that no one else would step forward, took a step forward, demonstrating courage and self-sacrifice. Without hesitation, he placed his hand into Fenrir's maw, while the Aesir bound the wolf in the Gleipnir, taking care not to harm him. Once the bonds were tightened, and Fenrir realized that he had been deceived, that he was trapped and unable to break free, he closed his jaws with fury and desperation, severing Tyr's hand, depriving him of the ability to wield weapons and fight. The loss of his hand did not stop Tyr, did not break his spirit, nor did it cause him to retreat. He continued to serve the gods, defending Asgard and helping people, sparing no effort. This act made him a symbol of sacrifice for the common good, a symbol of honor, courage, and selflessness. Fenrir was bound by the magical fetters and sent to distant lands, to a cavern nestled deep within the mountains, where he was to remain until Ragnarok itself, until the day he would be freed and take part in the final battle. After the tragic death of Balder, the radiant god, the world began to change, and the changes were for the worse. The 9 realms, once bound by order, harmony, peace, and prosperity, became engulfed in chaos, darkness, strife, and destruction. People ceased to revere the gods, forgot about morality and justice, and animosity, hatred, greed, envy, and malice filled human hearts, corroding them from within. Fraternal discord, betrayal, murder, and violence became some of the foremost symbols of this decline, foreshadowing the impending catastrophe. According to prophecies, brothers would begin to slay each other, fathers would fight with sons, and sons would rise against fathers, and the world of mortals would descend into endless wars, conflicts, and disputes in which there would be no victors. Ragnarok would commence not in Asgard, but among mortals, in the world of humankind, whose deeds and actions would reflect the moral decay of all the realms, demonstrating that darkness had triumphed over light. Asgard, too, did not escape this chaos, did not remain aloof from what was unfolding. The gods, consumed by grief, sorrow, anger, and a thirst for vengeance due to the tragic death of Balder, the bright god, began to lose their unity, to lose faith in each other and in their ideals. Loki, the principal culprit of the tragedy, the god of deception and cunning, was captured and severely punished for his misdeeds. But his malice, hatred, and thirst for revenge only intensified, poisoning his soul. Chained in a cave, bound to a rock, he harbored a plan to avenge himself upon the gods, dreaming of their demise and the destruction of the world, knowing that his children, the monstrous Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hela, were already preparing for the decisive battle to overthrow the gods and establish their dominion over the world. Each of these events carried profound symbolism, possessed hidden meaning, and foretold impending disasters. The death of Balder, fratricide, and the moral decline of humanity indicated that the world had reached its breaking point, that the equilibrium had been disrupted, and that darkness was gaining the upper hand over light. It was a sign that the order that the gods had attempted to maintain for centuries was no longer capable of containing chaos, that the days of Asgard were numbered, and that its demise was inevitable. When the sun no longer shines, when the sky is overcast with clouds, and people lose faith in the gods and in goodness, darkness descends, engulfing everything around. The gods understood that the days of Asgard were numbered, that their demise was foreordained, but they still tried to prevent the universe from utter destruction, fought for every day, for every life, striving to avert the catastrophe. Every omen, from the death of Balder to the decline of morals, led to one inescapable moment: Ragnarok, the final battle in which the fate of the world would be decided. It was not merely the end of times, but also the beginning of a new world, the birth of a new order that would succeed the old. The gods knew that their fate was sealed, that they were destined to perish in Ragnarok. But even in the face of destruction, they prepared to make a final stand against the forces of evil and chaos, to protect the world and preserve hope for the future. Asgard was filled with anxious anticipation. The gods prepared for war, sensing the approach of the end. The gods, usually proud, unyielding, and confident in their strength, now felt the breath of the inevitable end, sensed the approach of darkness. Their hearts clenched with foreboding of tragedy. The earth cracked beneath their feet. Icy winds carried a threat, and the waves of the ocean began to rise ever higher, portending a storm. Too many omens converged into one, indicating that Ragnarok was not far off. Ragnarok, the end of the world, the doom of the gods and all that exists, was no longer a distant prophecy, a nebulous prediction, or a terrifying tale. It was becoming a harsh reality, looming over the world like an inexorable avalanche. Loki, chained to a rock deep within a cavern, endured excruciating torment caused by the venom of a serpent dripping onto his face, suffering that the Aesir deemed eternal, a just retribution for his misdeeds. The venom corroding his flesh caused such unbearable pain that his cries, filled with despair and rage, shook the earth, echoing throughout all the realms. But Loki was not broken. He did not resign himself to his fate. He bided his time, waiting for the opportune moment to break free and avenge himself upon the gods for his suffering. And when the earth trembled more violently than usual, when cracks began to tear apart the stones, when the mountains shuddered, his shackles loosened, and he, gathering his last strength, burst free, greedily inhaling the air, filled with a foreboding of chaos, destruction, and impending doom. Now Loki no longer hid, did not lurk in the shadows. He emerged into the light to lead the forces of darkness and annihilate the world. His place was at the forefront of the impending destruction. He was ready to lead his allies into battle against the gods. Having been freed from his confinement, he made his way to Jotunheim, the icy realm of the giants, where the frost giants, thirsting for blood and vengeance, already awaited him. Their leader, the mighty Hrym, a frost giant, rose from his throne, and in his eyes was a burning desire to avenge himself upon the gods of Asgard for all the offenses and humiliations that they had inflicted upon the giants. Loki and Hrym forged an alliance, uniting their forces and promising each other to destroy everything that the Aesir had built for centuries, to shatter their world and to establish their dominion over the universe. And in the south, in fiery Muspelheim, the realm of the fire demons, Surtur, a fire giant, was already unsheathing his blazing sword, a sword that spewed forth flames, preparing to lead his demons to destroy the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge connecting Asgard and Midgard, a bridge that was destined to fall in flames. Meanwhile, from the depths of the ocean, Jormungandr, the world serpent, an immense monster whose body encircled the entire earth, began to rise. His appearance was a true calamity, a harbinger of the destruction of all living things, devastation and chaos. The seas swelled, raising enormous waves. Poisonous vapor billowed over the water, poisoning the land and the sky became heavy with his ominous presence. And in Helheim, the gloomy realm of the dead, Hela, Loki's daughter, the ruler of this world, flung open the gates of her kingdom, releasing her subjects into freedom. The dead, whose eyes burned with emptiness, whose bodies were covered in decay, silently emerged onto the lands to join Loki's army, swelling the ranks of the warriors of darkness. Asgard, standing at the pinnacle of the worlds, towering above all, watched this escalating turmoil, the approach of doom. The gods saw how the forces of chaos gathered from all sides, how darkness thickened over the world. Odin, always confident in his wisdom, insight and power, sent his ravens, Hugin and Munin, his faithful companions, flying throughout all the realms to learn the latest news from the worlds, to gather information about what was happening, and to warn the gods of the danger. The ravens returned to Asgard with grim tidings. Armies of giants, the dead, and demons were already marching toward Asgard to annihilate the gods and destroy the world. But the Aesir did not falter, did not fear, and did not retreat in the face of the looming threat. Odin, the supreme ruler of Asgard, stood upon his throne, Hlidskjalf, from which he could see all 9 realms, and surveyed his comrades, his loyal warriors, ready to fight to the end. He knew that this would be their final battle, that they were destined to perish in Ragnarok. But he also knew that they must fight to the last, to protect the world from the forces of evil and chaos. Each of the gods had a role to play in this battle, and none were about to retreat. None feared death. Thor, the mighty god of thunder, gripping his faithful hammer Mjolnir, stood ready to meet Jormungandr, the world serpent, to battle him in a deadly struggle. His resolve was unbroken, his will as strong as the lightning flashing in his gaze. Tyr, the brave god of war, who had lost a hand in a clash with Fenrir, sharpened his sword, ready to give his life for victory over the forces of darkness, knowing he must fight to the very end. Freya, the beautiful goddess of love and beauty, gathered the magic of the Vanir, preparing to use it to give Asgard even a slim chance of survival, to protect the world from destruction. On the bridge Bifrost, connecting Asgard to the other realms, stood Heimdall, the vigilant watchman, guarding the bridge from enemy invasion. He held Gjallarhorn, the horn whose sound would herald the start of battle, warning gods and humans of the impending danger. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the first fires of Surt's army, the fire demons approaching Asgard, were already visible. And as the first steps of the demons' heavy feet began to rumble across the rainbow bridge, shaking the earth and sky, Heimdall raised the horn and blew it. The piercing sound of Gjallarhorn, loud and shrill, echoed across all 9 realms of Norse cosmology, proclaiming that Ragnarok had begun, that the time of the final battle had come. Asgard stirred, the gods raised their weapons, preparing for battle, and their war cry, full of courage and determination, resounded through the halls of Valhalla, shaking the walls. This was their last fight, their last chance to save the world. They knew that they could not stop the end, that they were destined to perish, but each was ready to give their life so that a new world could be born from the ashes of the old, so that after the demise of the old world, a new era of prosperity and harmony could dawn. And as the enemies approached the gates of Asgard, the Aesir stepped into the chaos to repel the forces of darkness. First onto the battlefield stepped Odin, supreme ruler of Asgard, wise and all-knowing god, ready to fight to the end. The supreme god, with his spear Gungnir in hand, stood high on a hill, radiating strength and confidence. His gaze was fixed on the gigantic figure of Fenrir, a huge wolf that had broken free of his bonds and was now loose, thirsting for blood and vengeance. The wolf, with its chest puffed out and jaws agape, was so immense that it seemed he could swallow the sky itself, blotting out the sun. Fenrir howled. His voice, full of rage and malice, echoed across the field, causing the earth and the hearts of the gods to tremble. Odin did not flinch, was not afraid, and did not retreat. He was ready to face his fate head-on, without fear or doubt. The wolf lunged forward like an avalanche, sweeping away everything in its path, its claws tearing at the earth, raising clouds of dust and dirt. Odin, confidently and with lightning speed, hurled his spear Gungnir, which shone with magic and was aimed straight at the heart of the wolf. Gungnir crashed into the beast's body, but did not stop him, did not harm him. Fenrir rose on his hind legs and leaped at Odin, ready to devour him. The beast's jaws snapped shut, and Odin vanished into its maw. It was a moment that made time stand still, a moment when the hope of saving the world collapsed. The supreme god of Asgard, the symbol of wisdom, strength, and justice, had fallen, swallowed by chaos, consumed by darkness. But his death was not in vain, his sacrifice was not useless. This was a sign to the other gods, a signal to begin the final battle, a call to action. The time had come to fight to the last, sparing no effort to protect the world from destruction. At the other end of the battlefield, Thor, the mighty god of thunder, already stood face to face with his arch-enemy, the world serpent, Jormungandr, a gigantic monster whose body encircled the entire earth. The serpent rose above the ground, writhing in the sky, its body covered with scales, and its maw exuded a poisonous vapor that tainted everything around it, killing all living things. The waves of the ocean carried its poison throughout the world, destroying trees, homes, cities, and entire civilizations, turning everything into a lifeless wasteland. Thor, holding his faithful hammer Mjolnir in his hand, the symbol of his power and might, took the first step toward the serpent, showing no fear. Lightning crackled around his figure, as if nature itself, seeing his determination, obeyed his will, supporting him in this deadly fight. With a roaring growl that shook the earth, he hurled his hammer Mjolnir at the serpent, hoping to deliver a fatal blow. Mjolnir struck the serpent's head with terrifying force, bringing down upon it all the power of thunder and lightning. Jormungandr hissed in pain, its body contorted, writhing in agony, and water soared into the air in huge fountains, crashing down on the ground like rain. The serpent raised its massive head and struck the ground with its tail, shaking it, causing earthquakes and destruction. Thor barely managed to stay on his feet, but his rage was boundless, his determination did not weaken, and he was ready to fight to the end. He rushed forward with a force that could only be generated by the awareness of the imminent end, the understanding that the fate of the entire world depended on his actions. Mjolnir crashed again and again on the serpent's body, dealing blows of crushing force, and each blow echoed with peals of thunder, rumbling and lightning, shaking the sky. Finally, Thor delivered a decisive blow, putting all his strength into it, and the hammer shattered the serpent's skull, inflicting a mortal wound. Jormungandr collapsed to the ground. Its huge body began to writhe in convulsions, releasing the last drops of poison, polluting the earth and air. But this was not a victory, not the end of the battle. Thor, having taken only 9 steps after defeating the serpent, felt the serpent's venom enter his body, poisoning him from within. He fell to his knees, his breath became heavy and ragged, and the hammer slipped from his hand, falling helplessly to the ground. The god of thunder perished, poisoned by the serpent's venom, but his sacrifice was not in vain. It saved the world from the poisonous chaos that tainted all living things. Loki, the leader of the army of chaos, the god of deceit and lies, finally met Heimdall, the vigilant protector of Asgard, on the battlefield, full of fire, blood, death, shadows, and destruction. Their gazes met, and in them could be read hatred and contempt. Loki smiled, his eyes burning with vengeance and malice. Heimdall, with the horn Gjallarhorn in one hand and a sword in the other, stood like an unwavering wall, ready to defend Asgard to the last drop of blood. Without further ado, without long conversations, they rushed at each other, beginning a deadly fight. Loki, quick, agile and cunning, dodged Heimdall's powerful blows, using his trickery and dexterity. His dagger, sharp and deadly, flashed in the air, inflicting swift and precise strikes, leaving deep wounds on the Guardian's armor. But Heimdall did not give up, did not retreat, and did not lose hope. His strikes were precise, and his strength was unwavering. He fought as the embodiment of order and justice, striving to stop chaos and destruction. The clash was desperate, brutal, and bloody. Loki used all his tricks, employed deception, turned into shadows to confuse Heimdall, deflected his blows. But Heimdall fought like a true warrior, not succumbing to deception and not losing vigilance. Finally, at the climax of the battle, both gods inflicted fatal wounds on each other, striking each other down. Their bodies collapsed to the ground simultaneously, and blood, mixed with dirt, spread beneath their feet, forming a puddle. Both had fallen, and their battle ended in a draw. No one had won. Amid this terrible chaos, as gods and monsters perished one after another, falling to the ground like ears of corn cut down by a sickle, the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree linking all the worlds together, trembled. Its roots, soaked in the venom of Jormungandr, began to wither, rot and crumble, losing their strength and life energy. Surt, the fiery giant, raised his blazing sword, spewing flames, and pointed it at the world tree, setting it on fire. The massive flames that engulfed the branches of Yggdrasil began to spread to all the worlds, burning everything in their path. Along with the flames, the bridges connecting the worlds burned, destroying the connection between them and plunging them into chaos. And the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, linking Asgard and Midgard, cracked and collapsed, engulfed in flames, leaving behind nothing but ash and smoke. Stars fell from the sky, and the earth cracked, plunging all living things into the abyss, into the void of nothingness. This was the end. Ragnarok was over, the gods had fallen, the worlds destroyed, everything was annihilated. But from the ashes of the old world, a new world began to grow, a world free from evil and chaos, a world in which justice and harmony would reign. It was the end of an era, but not the end of everything. It was the beginning of a new cycle of rebirth and renewal. And although the Aesir were gone, their legends, their deeds, and their sacrifices continued to live on in the memory of the new world, as a reminder that even in chaos, there is room for hope, for rebirth, and for new life. The flames subsided. The earth, torn apart by war, still breathed smoke, but the fire had already gone out. But the rumble of battle no longer echoed in the heavens. Silence had descended, a silence that was deafening. The waves, stirred up in the fury of Jormungandr, gradually subsided, calming down, and the poisoned air slowly cleared, ridding itself of the venom. The winds no longer carried the smell of burning fire and death, and the shadows of the burned worlds began to dissipate, giving way to the light. Not all the gods fell in battle, not all perished in the flames of Ragnarok. Amid the fire and chaos, amid the destruction and death, there were those whom fate allowed to see the new dawn, to survive the end of the world, and to witness the rebirth of the world. Two sons of Thor, Modi and Magni, survived Ragnarok, surviving in the flames of battle. They were still young, but their strength was great, having inherited the power of their father. They found Mjolnir, the hammer that their father had held in his hands in the last moments of his life. the hammer that had become a symbol of protection, strength, thunder, and lightning. This hammer now belonged to them as Thor's legacy, and they were to use it to protect the world from evil. In the world of gods, Vidar and Vali, the sons of Odin who had survived Ragnarok, also remained. Vidar, Odin's son, was known for his silent strength, his resilience, courage, and determination. It was he who avenged his father's death, tearing apart Fenrir's jaws, killing the wolf, and ridding the world of the monster. He remained standing among the ruins, not broken by grief and loss, ready to revive Asgard from the ashes, to build a new world based on justice and order. Vali, yet another son of Odin, also survived Ragnarok, outliving the demise of the gods and the world's destruction. He was born to avenge Balder, to retaliate for his death. But now, a different destiny awaited him, a different task: to create a new world, a world free from evil, and to build a new society where peace and harmony would reign. But perhaps the most astonishing and incredible event was the return of Balder himself, the radiant god, son of Odin and Frigg. His spirit did not vanish, did not dissolve into oblivion. He did not remain forever in the cold and gloomy halls of Helheim, the realm of the dead. He did not stay there eternally. When the battle was over, when all 9 realms shuddered their final breath, weary, ruined and desolate, Balder, the shining god, returned from the realm of the dead, resurrected from ashes. Now Balder, once fallen by the treacherous machinations of Loki, betrayed and murdered, was destined to become the new ruler of the reborn world, to guide it toward prosperity and harmony. But what about the humans, those mortal beings who lived in Midgard? Were they not also a part of this story? Did they not deserve the right to a new life? Hidden deep within the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, in its very heart, 2 people named Leif and Lifthrasir, a man and a woman, survived Ragnarok, outliving the demise of the gods and the world's destruction. The flames of Surtur did not touch them, did not scorch them, nor did the poisonous air exhaled by Jörmungandr taint them. They remained unharmed. They sought refuge in the forests, concealed from the fire and destruction, until the battle was over, until the world had calmed, and now their fate is to begin a new lineage of humans, who would once again populate the world, inhabit it with their descendants, and build a new civilization. Ash settled upon the earth, covering it with a thick layer, and the sun, once hidden behind clouds of smoke, fire, and poison, rose again in the sky, illuminating the world with its light. This was a new sun, the daughter of the old star, which had perished during the battle, giving its life to save the world. Now its light touched the earth, warming it with its heat and reviving it, offering hope for a new life. Where once waves raged and fire blazed, where death and destruction reigned, grass sprouted again, greening and pleasing to the eye. The forest, which had burned in Surtur's fire, began to regrow, returning to life, its trees reaching for the sun, greedily absorbing its light. Streams, poisoned by the serpent's venom, became clean and clear, once again giving life to all living things. Even the air itself, which had been heavy with ash, became light and fresh, filling lungs with life. In place of Asgard, there was now only a wasteland, ruins that reminded of its former grandeur. The halls of Odin, Thor, Frigg, and all the other gods had turned to rubble, reduced to dust, but their spirit, their memory, and their legends remained alive in the hearts of the survivors. But on the horizon, a new Asgard was already appearing, rising from the ashes like a phoenix, a world free from evil and chaos. It was more modest, quieter, and calmer, but it was not shackled by old mistakes. It was not pulled back by the past. The gods who survived Ragnarok stood amidst the new greenery, watching as the world was born again, recovering from the destruction. Balder, returned from the realm of the dead, was now ready to become the ruler of this new world, leading it toward prosperity, justice, and harmony. He gazed upon his brothers, those who had survived Ragnarok, and knew that together they would build something new, something better than what had come before, a world where peace, love, and understanding would reign. In this new world, there was no place for the chaos of Loki, for the unbridled thirst for power of Odin, for the destructive storms of Thor. This was a world where order and nature existed in harmony, where gods and humans lived in peace and accord. But at its very core, in its very heart, there still remained a trace of the past, an imprint of tragedy, a memory of Ragnarok, of the fact that even gods are not eternal, that even the most beautiful world can be destroyed. The new world was better than the old, but he knew that one day the cycle might begin again, that someday the forces of chaos would rise again to destroy the world, and therefore he must be ready for it. But as long as the world lived, as long as the sun shone and leaves grew on the branches of trees, life had a chance. There was an opportunity to flourish, and that was what mattered most. The stories of gods, heroes, monsters, and prophecies did not vanish with the arrival of the new era. They were not forgotten, nor did they fade into oblivion. Even after the fall of Asgard, after the demise of the gods and the destruction of the world, their images continue to live in the hearts of humans, reminding them of the past. The myths that ancient skalds told by the fire, passed down from mouth to mouth, have moved into books, movies, games, and other forms of art, becoming an integral part of modern culture, capturing the hearts of millions of people around the world. Today, Thor, Odin, or Loki are known even by those who have never opened the old sagas, have not read the Edda, and are not interested in Norse mythology. They have transitioned into comics, have become characters in films and television series, capturing the attention of viewers with their strength, cunning, and wisdom. Of course, their images are often altered, adapted to the new era to be more understandable and interesting to a modern audience, but the essence, the foundation of their character and their motives remain the same, unchanged. Thor remains a symbol of strength, courage, and protection, ready to come to the aid of those who need defending. Loki, of cunning, treachery, unpredictability, and rebellion, breaking rules and defying conventions. Odin, of wisdom, knowledge, strategy, and the pursuit of understanding the world. Their stories intertwine with modern narratives, with the plots of films and books, because they are timeless, because they are relevant in all eras. In video games such as God of War, Norse mythology comes alive, allowing players to face gods and monsters themselves, to feel part of this world and to influence its fate. In literature, from the novels of Neil Gaiman to Percy Jackson, ancient gods are given new life, acquiring modern traits and interacting with the contemporary world. And in cinema, their stories are retold again and again, sometimes distorted, sometimes altered, but still recognizable, retaining their appeal and interest. For the Norse themselves, these myths were not just stories, entertaining tales. They were part of their lives, their culture, and their worldview. They shaped their attitude toward life, toward death, toward the world, and toward the gods. Vikings did not fear death because they knew that if they fell with a sword in hand in honorable combat, they would go to Valhalla, Odin's heavenly hall, where eternal feasting and glory awaited them. They believed that even if Ragnarok, the end of the world, came, one must fight to the end, not retreat or surrender, remaining true to one's ideals. This spirit, this philosophy of courage, resilience, and dedication continues to live in the hearts of the Vikings' descendants, manifesting in their character, in their actions, and in their attitude toward life. It is evident in codes of honor, in military strategy, in art, in literature, in cinema, and even in how people today perceive the inevitability of change, how they accept the challenges of fate, and how they cope with difficulties. Myths are not just stories about the past. They shape the present and influence the future. And perhaps this is why Norse mythology continues to inspire millions of people around the world, attracting their attention with its depth, beauty, wisdom, and eternal values. But not only gods and monsters have left their mark on history, not only they have become the heroes of legends and myths. Among humans too, there were those whose names became part of the great epic, whose deeds went down in history. And one of the most famous and legendary heroes, standing on the border between myth and reality, was Ragnar Lothbrok, a valiant Viking whose adventures continue to inspire people around the world. Finally, let us explore the story of Ragnar Lothbrok, a brave Viking, a hero of legends and traditions, whose name has become a symbol of courage, valor, strength, and a thirst for adventure. He was a man, a mortal, but his name sounded as if he himself had emerged from myth, stepped from the pages of ancient sagas. His exploits were so great and incredible that even centuries later, it is impossible to say with certainty where historical truth ends and fiction begins, where reality intertwines with legend. He was a pirate, a fearless warrior, a conqueror of new lands, a wise ruler, a loving husband to powerful and beautiful women, and the father of glorious and strong sons, renowned for their deeds. His life is a bridge between the world of legends, the world of gods and heroes, and the world of reality, the world of humans, with their weaknesses and passions, and his death became so symbolic, so significant, that it is hard to believe that it could have been a simple accident, a mere coincidence. Skalds, ancient poets and singers, composed songs about Ragnar, praising his bravery, his intellect, his wisdom, and his nobility, claiming that he was a descendant of Odin himself, the supreme god of the Norse pantheon. Perhaps this was just a beautiful metaphor, a poetic exaggeration designed to exalt the hero, but his very fate, his life full of adventures, trials, and exploits, resembled the path of a mythological hero, walking toward his destiny. Ragnar was a jarl, a chieftain, a ruler, and then a king, uniting many lands and peoples under his rule, who lived in an era of great change, when the world was changing before his eyes, when the old orders were collapsing and new ones were only emerging. He knew no rest, did not sit still. He was constantly drawn to distant lands. His heart yearned for adventure. His sword always sought a new battle, and his ships, new lands, new treasures, and new glory. Lothbrok is not a surname, but a nickname given to Ragnar, meaning leather trousers. Legends say that he wore unusual leather trousers, sewn from animal hides and treated with tar, to protect himself from snake bites when he fought a huge serpent guarding a beautiful maiden he wished to marry in his youth. But perhaps it was simply an attempt to explain his unusual and memorable name, which slipped from century to century, passed down from mouth to mouth, shrouded in ever-new legends and tales. He rose to fame through his daring raids on the wealthy cities and settlements of Europe, bringing booty and glory to his warriors. France, England, Ireland, and other countries could not feel safe, could not sleep soundly, when his longships, the swift vessels of the Vikings, appeared on the horizon, foreshadowing disaster. His most renowned and extensive campaigns involved Paris and England, where he proved himself to be a talented warrior, strategist, and ruler. Ragnar was not only a fearless warrior, but also a wise strategist, a far-sighted politician, and a man who always knew how to find a way out, even in the most hopeless situations, using his wit, his cunning, and his intuition. The French had heard tales of the Vikings, of their ferocity and lust for wealth, but they never imagined that anyone would dare attack the great city of Paris, the heart of the Frankish kingdom. However, in the year 845, Ragnar's fleet, consisting of numerous longships, approached the city walls, sowing fear and panic among the inhabitants. Ragnar, displaying his strategic brilliance, divided his forces, creating chaos and confusion among the defenders, and then, laying siege to the city, demanded a huge ransom, threatening its destruction. The terrified King Charles the Bald, unwilling to lose his capital, paid him 7,000 pounds of silver, a staggering sum that could have been the price of an entire kingdom, just to make the Viking leave and bring peace to the city. But Paris was just one episode in his eventful life, just one of many adventures. The most famous and tragic part of his story is linked to England, where his fate was sealed, where death and eternal glory awaited him. Legends say that Ragnar sailed to the shores of Northumbria, one of the kingdoms of England, to seize new lands, but his ship was wrecked, smashed against the rocks. He fell into the hands of King Ella, the ruler of Northumbria, who had no intention of letting such a dangerous and powerful enemy go, knowing that sooner or later he would return with an army to seek revenge. Ella did not fight Ragnar in fair combat, did not risk his army, but devised an execution worthy of myth, cruel and elaborate. It is said that when Ella ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit full of venomous snakes, the Viking did not flinch, did not show fear, and did not break under the weight of circumstances. He did not beg for mercy, did not ask for compassion, and did not call for help from his relatives, knowing that it was useless. Instead, looking death in the face, he uttered only prophetic words. How the little piglets would squeal when they knew how the old boar suffered, foretelling the wrath and vengeance of his sons. It was not just a threat, not just a curse, it was a prophecy, and it came true, fulfilled to the fullest extent. When Ragnar's sons learned of his death, of his martyred demise, they did not simply set out to avenge their father. They unleashed upon England such wrath, such fury, and such power that even centuries later he was remembered and feared. They assembled the great heathen army, consisting of warriors from all corners of the world, and crushed Northumbria, conquering it and establishing their rule there, cruelly avenging their father's death upon King Ella, subjecting him to a terrible and agonizing execution worthy of his evil deeds. And with that, our lecture comes to an end. Our journey through time concludes. We have embarked on a fascinating journey through the ages, starting with the mythical beginning of the world, with the creation of the universe, and ending with the historical events associated with the legendary Viking Ragnar Lothbrok. We have become acquainted with the great gods of Asgard, with their exploits, their passions, and their tragic fate. We have witnessed how the world was born and how it fell during Ragnarok. We have learned how myths shaped the worldview of people, how they influenced their lives, and how they continue to live in our culture today, reminding us of the past. Thank you for embarking on this exciting journey with me, for dedicating your time and attention. I hope this lecture was interesting and informative for you, helped you learn something new and useful, and perhaps even inspired you to look at ancient legends in a new way, with interest and respect. Until next time, dear listeners, and may the gods always be kind to you, granting you luck, wisdom, and strength.